In this video, we're going to be using the zero factor property to solve quadratic equations. If you want to review the zero factor property, there's a link for that. It's going to come up right now, as well as at the end of this video. But we remember that the zero factor property basically says that if we have two quantities, A times B equals 0, then either A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0. We're going to use this property to solve quadratic equations. And those are equations we can write in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Now we know to use our zero factor property, we have to have 0 isolated on one side. So the first thing we're going to have to do with this left side before we start solving is we're going to have to factor this somehow into our quantities of a and b, so we could factor them where they're being multiplied and set up our two equations. So that's going to be our first step to basically factor the quadratic equation that we have. All right, let's get into some examples. So for number one, we've got y squared plus 2y equals 0. So we've got 0 isolated on the right side. Let's figure out how we can factor this, because we want this to be in the form a times b equals 0 to use our zero factor property. Well, we know y squared is y times y plus 2y, which is 2 times y, equals 0. So we've got a y and a y that we can factor out, and we can keep the y plus 2 in our parentheses equals 0. So now this y, this is our a quantity, y plus 2, that's our b quantity. So now we can factor this where they're being multiplied and set up our two equations. Y equals 0, y plus 2 equals 0. Let's solve this y plus 2 equals 0, so I'm going to subtract 2. I get y equals negative 2, so my solution is going to be y equals 0 and negative 2. All right, for number 2, we've got x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. So again, we've got 0 isolated on the right side. We need to factor this left side here, this quadratic trinomial. So now we've got 3 terms here. We know this is going to factor into a pair of binomials. And we know the first term in our binomial is going to come from that x squared. Well, what does x squared factor into? It factors into x times x. So x times x is going to go here. The second term in our binomial is going to come from the minus 6. So we've got to factor that minus 6 or negative 6. So we want to find two numbers that multiply to negative 6. But our check is those two numbers have to add to this middle term, which is negative 1. So whatever two terms we get, we're going to add them up, and it should give us negative 1. So let's think of two values. Let's do let's test some values. So to multiply to negative 6, let's do negative 2 and positive 3. Well, negative 2 times positive 3 multiplies to negative 6. If I add those up, negative 2 plus positive 3, I get positive 1, which is not equal to negative 1. So it doesn't check. That's not my middle term. So let's try something else. Instead of negative 2 and positive 3, let's do negative 3 and positive 2. Well, negative 3 times positive 2 still gives me negative 6. But if I add them, I get negative 1, which is equal to negative 1. All right, so that checks. That gives me that middle term. So we could add negative 3 and positive 2. So we're able to factor this into our binomial. X minus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0. And now we could factor this right where they're being multiplied. So we're going to set x minus 3 equal to 0 and x plus 2 equal to 0. Add 3 and 3, and we get x equals 3. Subtract 2 and 2. And I get x equals negative 2. So my two solutions here are going to be negative 2 and 3. Now let's do two more examples. Number 3, we've got x squared minus x minus 12 equals 0. So again, our zero factor property, a times b equals 0. So we've got 0 on the right side. We need the a and the b. So we want to factor this quadratic trinomial into a pair of binomials. We know that first term again is going to come from the x squared factors into x times x, so that x and x is here. These last terms are going to come from the negative 12. We want two numbers that multiply to negative 12, but add to that middle term, which is -1. So let's try some values. What if I do like maybe -6 and +2? I'm just testing some values just so you guys can see how we're doing some guess and check here. -6 times +2 gives us -12, but if I add them together, I get -4, which is not equal to the -1. So what do we want? We know that, well, 4 and 3 have a difference of 1, so let's use those two. I want a negative value, so let's do maybe -4 and +3. -4 times +3 gives me -12. If I add -4 and +3, I get -1, which is equal to -1. So my terms are going to be -4 and +3. So now we could factor this where they're being multiplied, right? This is my A, this is my B. So we can set up our equation. X minus 4 equals 0. X plus 3 equals 0. Let's solve these for x. Plus 4. Plus 4. I get x equals 4. Minus 3. Minus 3. X equals -3, so our solution is going to be -3 and 4. And the last one, number 4, we've got x squared minus 13x plus 42 equals 0, so 0 is isolated on the right side. We need to factor this trinomial on the left side, so we want a pair of binomials. So again, we know that first term is going to come from the x squared. X squared factors into x times x. And then let's take that 42. We want to find two numbers that multiply to 42, but add to that middle term -13. So we can think about maybe 7 and 6. If we do 7 times 6, we get 42, positive 42. But 7 plus 6 is positive 13, which is not equal to -13. So what change can we make? Well, if I make them both negative, -7, and -6, I'm still going to get positive 42. If I add those up, I'm going to get -13 equals -13. So my values are going to be -7 and -6. So my value is going to be -7 and -6. Now we can factor this where we're multiplying right here. So this is going to be x minus 7 equals 0. X minus 6 equals 0. Add the 7, add the 7, add the 6, add the 6, and we get x equals 7, x equals 6, so our solution is going to be x equals 6 and x equals 7 for number 4. This video was on solving quadratic equations using the zero factor property. I hope this video helped you understand this concept a little bit more. If you want a bigger review on the zero factor property, you can click the link that's coming up right now. If you like this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. This is Nick from First Coast Math Clinic.